The town of Elmridge was small and quiet, the kind of place where everyone knew each other by name. Dirt roads curled around open fields and wooden fences marked off old family farms. People here worked with their hands and trusted in the rhythm of the seasons. Harlan owned most of the land around town. He lived in the biggest house on the hill, a tall white house with a red roof and a long gravel driveway. He wore fancy boots and carried a silver cane, even though he didn't need it to walk. Folks said he was proud, maybe too proud, and while people nodded politely when he passed, no one truly liked him. Mr. Thomas was different. He didn't own land, he rented a small patch from Mr. Harlan, but he worked it like it was his own. He was quiet, always early to rise, and gentle with animals. He didn't say much, but when he did, his words were soft and thoughtful. He wore the same old hat every day, and always waved to people as he passed. I watched them both from behind my store counter. One had power, the other had patience. And soon, their worlds would collide. For nearly 20 years, Mr. Thomas had rented the same piece of land from Mr. Harlan. It wasn't perfect land. Too dry in summer, too muddy in spring, but Mr. Thomas made the best of it. He grew corn, beans and sunflowers, enough to keep his farm going and sell a bit at the market. He always paid rent on time, and never asked for more than what was fair. But one morning, things changed. Mr. Harlan showed up at the edge of Mr. Thomas's field, wearing his fancy boots and holding a rolled-up paper. His voice was loud enough for the nearby cows to lift their heads. "Thomas," he called. "Your rent's going up starting next month. Double." Mr. Thomas looked up from where he was fixing the fence. "Double, but the land hasn't changed." "Doesn't matter," Mr. Harlan said with a smirk. "It's my land. If you want to stay, you pay more." Mr. Thomas wiped his hands on his jeans. "I've worked this land for years, that's not fair." Mr. Harlan laughed. "Fair? This is business. You're just a tenant. Be thankful I let you stay this long." Word of the argument spread through town like wildfire. At the diner, at the gas station, even in my little shop, everyone was whispering about it. Some folks were angry for Mr. Thomas, but no one dared speak up. Mr. Harlan had money and connections. He wasn't someone people crossed. Mr. Thomas didn't shout, he didn't fight, he just kept working, quieter than usual. I saw him in town a few days later. He looked tired, but not broken. He bought some nails, a loaf of bread, and thanked me with a small smile. He didn't know it yet, but his patience would soon be tested more than ever, and so would the town's sense of right and wrong. It was a warm Saturday morning, when everything boiled over. The town market was busy, filled with the smell of fresh bread and the sound of friendly chatter. Mr. Thomas had just set up his small table near the corner, selling fresh vegetables, carrots, onions and a few jars of homemade pickles. He wasn't loud like the others, he simply stood behind his table, smiling kindly at folks who came by. Then Mr. Harlan arrived. He stomped through the crowd, his silver cane tapping the ground like thunder. People moved out of his way. I was stacking fruit at my stall when I saw him walk straight up to Mr. Thomas. "You still haven't paid the new rent," Mr. Harlan said loudly, loud enough for everyone to hear. Mr. Thomas looked up calmly. "We haven't come to an agreement yet." "There's no agreement, Thomas. You pay or you leave. This land doesn't belong to beggars." The market fell quiet. You could hear a pin drop. Mr. Thomas didn't raise his voice. "I've worked that land for almost 20 years, and I've owned it." Mr. Harlan barked, "Don't forget your place." People stared, some pretending to look at apples or bread, trying not to get involved. I could see the shame on Mr. Thomas's face. Not anger, not even fear, just quiet hurt. He picked up a basket of carrots and turned away, not saying another word. Mr. Harlan raised his voice one last time. "You have 30 days, Thomas. 30 days to pack up and get off my land." He walked off like nothing had happened. The market buzz slowly returned, but something had changed. People were uneasy. They had seen a good man get pushed down, and no one had done a thing. That moment stayed with us all, especially Mr. Thomas. After that terrible scene at the market, most people expected Mr. Thomas to give up. He wasn't a fighter. He was the kind of man who fixed his own roof, fed stray dogs, and kept to himself. But what no one knew was that quiet didn't mean weak. About a week later, I saw him walk into the small legal aid office at the edge of town. It was a plain brick building with a flickering sign and peeling paint. Hardly anyone noticed it. But Mr. Thomas walked in like he had something important to do. Inside, he met with a young lawyer named Miss Carter. She was new to town, and still learning everyone's names, but she listened carefully. Mr. Thomas laid everything out: how long he had farmed the land, how he had kept every rent receipt, how he had never been late on a payment. He even had old photos of the crops he'd grown, and how he'd improved the soil over the years. Miss Carter nodded slowly. "You've got more than a story," she said. "You've got a case." Together they filed a complaint with the county court. It was a big step. Not many people went up against Mr. Harlan. He was rich, well-connected, and used to getting his way. But Mr. Thomas didn't seem afraid. He just wanted what was right. When word spread that he was taking Mr. Harlan to court, the town lit up with whispers. Some folks were shocked, others were secretly cheering for him, though few would say it out loud. "He won't win," some muttered. "Harlan's got too much power." But I watched Mr. Thomas walking home from town that evening, a small stack of papers under his arm, his steps steady. There was something different in the way he held himself, not pride exactly, but quiet strength. He wasn't just fighting for his land now, he was fighting for his dignity. The courthouse in Elmridge had never seen a crowd so big. People packed the wooden benches, whispering and shifting in their seats, waiting for something important to happen. It wasn't every day that someone like Mr. Thomas stood up to someone like Mr. Harlan. I sat near the back, clutching my sweater tightly, watching everything unfold. Mr. Harlan arrived first, wearing a dark suit and a smug smile. He had 2 lawyers with him, both dressed sharp, carrying thick folders. He looked around the room like he owned it, because in many ways he thought he did. Then the doors opened again, and Mr. Thomas walked in. He wore his best shirt and clean jeans, and though his clothes were simple, he looked proud. Not loud, not showy, just strong in his own quiet way. Beside him was Miss Carter, holding a small folder of documents. She looked nervous, but determined. The judge entered, an older man with kind eyes and a firm voice. The room stood still as the trial began. Mr. Harlan's lawyers spoke first. They said the land belonged to Mr. Harlan, that rent was his choice to raise, and that Mr. Thomas had no right to complain. One lawyer even said, "He's just a tenant. That land was never his." Mr. Harlan leaned back, nodding smugly. But then Miss Carter stood up. She spoke clearly and respectfully. She showed the judge all the papers, every rent payment, every letter Mr. Thomas had written over the years. She explained how Mr. Thomas had improved the land, fixed broken fences, planted new crops, and never once missed a rent payment. Then Mr. Thomas took the stand. He spoke softly but clearly. "I've treated that land like it was my own," he said. "I've never asked for more than what was fair. I'm not trying to take what isn't mine. I'm just asking to be treated with respect." The room was silent. Mr. Harlan rolled his eyes and muttered under his breath. He even tried to interrupt, but the judge raised a hand. "Let him finish." When Mr. Thomas stepped down, I saw something change in the judge's eyes. He looked at Mr. Thomas with a kind of respect I hadn't seen before. The kind people usually reserved for those who stood tall, even when the world tried to push them down. And when the judge finally spoke, his voice was calm, but strong. "Mr. Thomas has shown more dignity, more responsibility, and more honesty than most men I've seen in this courtroom. And I must say, sir, you have earned the court's respect." Gasps echoed through the room. The word hung in the air, sir. Mr. Harlan looked like he had swallowed a lemon. His lawyers fumbled with their papers, but it was too late. The courtroom had already chosen who they believed in, and it wasn't the man in the expensive suit. The courtroom stayed quiet even after the judge's words. It was like everyone needed a moment to take it all in. No one had ever called Mr. Thomas sir, in public before, Not like that. But the way the judge said it, calm and sure, made it clear that something had shifted. Mr. Harlan sat frozen, his face stiff and red. For the first time he didn't look so powerful. He looked small, his lawyers whispered quickly, flipping through papers. But the judge had already made up his mind to hear everything, fairly and fully. Miss Carter stood again. She brought out more photos, pictures of the land from years ago, when it was dry and empty. Then she showed pictures from the last season, full of green rows, fences mended and crops thriving. Mr. Thomas had kept it all, even an old calendar, marked with planting dates. The judge leaned forward. You've worked this land with care, Mr. Thomas. Your actions show ownership and spirit, if not on paper. Then came Mr. Harlan's turn to speak. He rose, voice sharp. He's twisting the law. That land is mine. I can do what I want with it. I don't have to answer to a farmhand. The judge stared at him for a long moment. You do have to answer to the law, and to decency. Mr. Harlan opened his mouth to speak again, but the judge raised a hand to stop him. Enough. You've had your say. Everyone in the room sat still. I saw older folks holding hands. I saw younger ones nodding slowly. What they saw that day wasn't just a court case. It was a man standing tall, defending what he loved, not with fists or shouting, but with quiet proof and honest work. And when the judge looked at Mr. Thomas again, his words were simple, but powerful. You're not just anything, Mr. Thomas. You're a man of honor. And from this day forward, in this courtroom, you'll be treated as such. It wasn't just about land anymore. It was about respect. About being seen. And for the first time in a long time, Mr. Thomas was. The courtroom was still as the judge reached for his papers. He cleared his throat, and every eye turned to him. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. This court has reviewed the documents, the testimony, and the history between the two parties. The judge began. His voice was steady, but there was something strong beneath it. Based on the evidence, Mr. Thomas is protected under long-term tenant rights. He has paid rent faithfully, and improved the land over the years. Mr. Thomas stood quietly, hands folded in front of him. The judge continued. Therefore this court rules in favor of Mr. Thomas. He may continue to farm the land without increased rent, under the current agreement. Furthermore, Mr. Harlan is ordered to treat Mr. Thomas with fairness, and follow all state tenancy laws. Failure to do so will result in legal penalties, including fines. A murmur ran through the room. Harlan's face turned deep red. He didn't say a word, he simply stood, grabbed his silver cane, and marched out of the courtroom. His expensive shoes tapping angrily across the floor. His lawyers followed, avoiding everyone's gaze. Thomas stood still for a moment, as if making sure he had heard the words right. Then he let out a slow breath and nodded. "Thank you, Your Honor," he said quietly. He walked up to the judge and extended his hand. The judge stood and shook it firmly. "You've earned this, Mr. Thomas." The room stayed quiet, but I heard soft clapping start from one corner. Mrs. Ellis, the school librarian. Then a few others joined. Mr. Brown from the feed store, a young man from the post office, even some teenagers from the back row. It wasn't loud or showy, but it was real. Thomas turned, his eyes a little shiny, but he smiled and nodded to the room. Not proud, just grateful. As I watched him walk out of the courtroom, shoulders back and steps steady, I realized something. Sometimes the strongest people don't raise their voices. They just keep standing, no matter how strong the wind blows. And now, finally, the wind had shifted. After the court ruling, things started to feel different in Elmridge. It wasn't sudden, like a thunderstorm. It was quiet, more like the soft change from summer to fall. Mr. Thomas went back to his farm the very next morning. He didn't throw a party, or put up a sign. He simply fed his animals, watered his crops, and went on with the work he'd always done. But now, when he walked through town, people looked at him differently. Kids who used to run past him without a glance started waving. Grown men tipped their hats. A few folks even stopped to ask about his vegetables, or how the soil was doing that week. It wasn't loud praise. It was respect, the kind that shone in small everyday ways. I watched from my store as neighbors, who'd once looked away at the market, now crossed the street just to shake his hand. Some apologized for staying silent when Mr. Harlan embarrassed him. Mr. Thomas never held it against them. He simply smiled and said, "It's in the past." Mr. Harlan, on the other hand, stayed quiet. He didn't come around as much anymore. He kept to himself, riding through town in his truck with the windows up. His fancy cane was still there, but the proud smirk he used to wear was gone. Mr. Thomas didn't gloat. He didn't change who he was. He just kept showing up, on time, kind, and steady as always. Only now, people saw him for who he had always been. And the land, his land, seemed to shine a little brighter. In Elmridge, folks started talking less about who owned what, and more about who earned it. Thomas had earned every single step he took across those fields. Time passed, but the story of Mr. Thomas and Mr. Harlan stayed with us. It became something folks talked about over coffee at the diner, or while waiting in line at the post office. Not because it was dramatic, but because it reminded us of something important, something real. People started thinking twice about how they treated others. Not just landowners and farmers, but everyone. Respect didn't come from money, or loud voices, or big houses on hills. It came from how a person carried themselves. From honesty. From hard work. From standing up without knocking others down. I watched Mr. Thomas one evening, as he walked through town, a basket of fresh corn in one hand, and a smile on his face. He stopped to chat with the hardware store owner, helped a boy fix the chain on his bike, and still had time to wave at me as he passed my shop. He hadn't changed at all, but we had. We had learned that quiet doesn't mean weak. That being humble doesn't mean letting people walk over you. And that sometimes, the strongest people are the ones who say the least. Mr. Thomas never wanted to be the center of attention. He never asked for praise. But by standing up for what was right, he taught the whole town something we'd almost forgotten. Dignity can't be taken. It can only be given away, and Mr. Thomas never let his go. In a world that often listens to the loudest voice, we learned to look a little closer, to listen a little harder, and to see the strength in silence. And for that we'll always be grateful to the man the court called Sir.